Welcome to Estate Planning Beyond the Binder.
Hey everyone, welcome to an all-new episode of Estate Planning Beyond the Binder with Brian Chu, the managing partner over at OC Wills and Trust. I'm your host, Mike Leon. Brian has over 25 years of experience guiding Orange County families through estate planning that protects their loved ones and their legacies. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the digital life, family photos that are stored in the cloud, online banking, even cryptocurrency. These assets can disappear or be locked away without the right planning. And Brian's here to explain how to make sure your digital life is protected, just like everything else you've worked for in life. Brian, it's good to see you. Can you explain to the audience out there, in today's world, what counts as a digital asset, especially when it comes to estate planning?
Well, thank you, Mike, for having me on the program. A digital asset is basically it's what you think about. It's an asset that's not a physical asset. It's not money. It could be a digital song you own. It could be obviously the most common thing that people think about is things like cryptocurrency. It could be an NFT. There are things that people buy that exist solely digitally. In other words, it's a basically electronic asset that requires access, usually a username and password at the very least, to access that asset. There's no physical location like a bank or a storage unit or something like that where we can go get that asset. It exists strictly online.
And it's funny because those are so easy to overlook. So what happens if someone passes away without leaving instructions or access, like you mentioned, for these digital accounts?
Well, the issue there's two issues. There's a legal and then there's the practical. The legal issue is that, if you have, for example, if you have a bank account and somebody passes away, there's a bank, like if that money's at Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, something like that, there's a bank where somebody can go to that bank and say, hey, I'm in charge and I want to get control of that money. There's varying ways to get control of that money, but at least there is a way. The problem with digital assets, and depending on what type of digital assets, there may be very limited ways, if any, to get to the money. Or there may be no way to get to the money if you don't have access to it, like cryptocurrency. I mean, people think about, obviously, with the average price of Bitcoin now, one Bitcoin being over $100,000, those are substantial assets. If you don't have access to the assets, in other words, the username, passwords, and can satisfy all the security protocol, those assets are lost forever, potentially.
Speaking of assets that may be lost forever, a lot of families, myself included, we upload photos to the cloud, got priceless photos, videos of our kids, all these records online. How can the estate planning part of this make sure that those memories aren't lost?
Most estate plans, the basic premise is it puts somebody in charge when you can't be in charge due to incapacity or passing on. And in theory, that person, they have the legal authority to gain control of your assets, including digital assets. And that's what most estate plans will address by assigning, because digital assets are considered personal property, by assigning those personal property to your estate, or most typically when you have a revocable trust, to your trust. So from a legal sense, somebody has the ability to gain control of the assets. And that's fine, except for the fact the practical side is, can they really get to the asset? Because again, the institution that controls that asset may or may not have a procedure how to recover those assets if you don't have a username and password and can satisfy the various security protocols like two-factor authentication. And again, and so like digital photos, they're stored on Dropbox or Google Cloud, Google Photos or something like that. And while those institutions have methods how somebody can gain control of the assets, the bureaucracy trying to deal with them if you don't have the right credentials is difficult. They don't have a department to deal with when somebody dies, people going to court. I mean, if they do, it's very small. That's not their business. Okay. Unlike a bank, a bank will have a department to deal with when somebody passes away. Most of these digital, these internet companies and such, they don't have such a department. That's not their problem. And so that's the practical side of things is, it's one thing for somebody to have the legal authority to deal with that asset. It's another thing, can they actually get to it? And then with crypto, especially, like I said, the biggest issue with crypto, depending on how you hold it, again, those companies, Coinbase and such, Robinhood, their departments to deal with when somebody passes away are very limited, if any. And depending on how the cryptos hold, like if you hold it on a physical drive, basically the cryptocurrency is like a gold bar. You lose the gold bar, well, it's gone. You can't find it. It gets thrown away. What have you. There's no recovery. There's no place to go get it. You have to physically possess it and then know the passcodes to get into it. And if you don't know the passcodes, that money is effectively lost.
Save your passwords, right? I want to stay on this for a second because on the financial side, I know we talked about cryptocurrency, but what about like the PayPals and Venmos of the world? They act in essence as a bank, a transaction, right? So does it complicate things when families don't have any plan in place for assets like that?
I mean, again, there's a legal and practical. The legal is, can they get access to it? So at least with PayPal, Venmo, I mean, they are similar to a bank. They do have some ability to go after. There's somebody you can contact if you get a court order, perhaps through probate, which again you'd like to avoid in the first place. There are options. Of course, the practical side, is it worth it? There may be a $3,000 or $4,000 in a bank account, which is not it's a substantial amount of money, but it's also, if you have to go to court to get that money. In other words, you're not able to access that money using the normal username, password, and two-factor authentication. Then it's just not worth it. It would cost you thousands of dollars to hire an attorney to help with that process, and at that point, what's the point? So that's probably the hardest thing about the digital assets is, if you can't get access to it and you need to go to court to gain access to it, is it worth it? And there really needs to be, literally tens of thousands of dollars, that you need to get to in order to make it worth it. Which, especially for families where, $3,000 or $4,000 is significant, but again, they just can't afford to hire. It's just not worth hiring an attorney. That makes things even worse. Obviously, if it's a fairly wealthy family, $3,000 or $4,000 is not going to make a big difference. But a lot of families that can make a big difference, and so that's why it's just key, making sure there's a plan. Again, not just the legal plan. The legal plan's part one, but there's a practical plan, a logistical plan in place. And I emphasize that with our clients. The legal is my job is to get somebody to your desk. They're now at your desk. They're in charge. In charge of what? That's your job. You got to tell them, because obviously that's the other big issue is, when you have digital assets. And again, people overlooking it is, does the person when you pass away even aware of it? Again, there's a lot of times you're not getting any kind of statement or anything like that. With crypto, there is no statement. It's just, you own it, as example, or, no one's getting statements about all your photos and things like that. And so, the practical issue is, can they even find it in the first place? And then secondary is getting access to it. And then finally, how are we going to provide access to it, especially when dealing with something like crypto currency, where it's very valuable? Now you got to have your own security protocol as far as how are you going to store that information? How is somebody, whoever would be in charge, going to get access to that information? Because you may not want to give that information to them now. And even if you did give it to them now, how do you, people, they have a hard enough time keeping track of their own passwords, let alone passing on the new password information on to whoever it is that's going to be in charge after that. Yep. So how do you keep that secure? But at the same time, if people write on paper and put it in a safe, well, what if the house burns down? And we saw here in Los Angeles last year, people's houses burned down and it was all lost. And so how do you protect? And even if they put the money in the bank at the safe deposit box, as some people do, we saw in the Palisades, the bank burned down too.
It's very convoluted. I did want to ask you though, because you mentioned about legal versus practical. So on the legal side, what kind of legal documents or tools allow a trustee to access legally these digital property assets?
Well, that's the challenge, because, it's, again, your normal bank, 401k, life insurance policy is going to have a beneficiary. Okay. And so whether that beneficiary be a person or a trust, as long as you can prove you're that person, or that person is the beneficiary or the person in charge, the bank, or the institution will allow you access to gain control of that money. The issue is with most digital assets, or even some of these newer banks, these purely online banks, there are a lot of limitations whether they even allow beneficiaries. So that's the issue, is that some of these institutions like Coinbase, they don't allow beneficiaries. Crypto doesn't allow beneficiaries. Okay, so that's the biggest issue. PayPal, as far as I know, doesn't have a provision for a beneficiary, at least not that I've seen. Now, this does change. I mean, I've seen some of these banks that, a year ago that didn't allow beneficiaries now are allowing them as they get older. But some of these, especially these newer banks and things like that, or, getting crypto, there is no beneficiary. So, is there a legal method? I suppose there's a potential that, if you get a court order, but again, that's going to probate. And once you go to probate, now you're taking a big chance as far as, you're paying an attorney a fair amount of money, and you may not even know how much money's there.
Right.
It may turn out to be zero, maybe turn out to $1,000.
Right.
Because if you don't know, again, you're not getting statements. Of course, that's part of the issue. You can't get into the account. So, and so, that's the real problem is, even if you know about it, the mechanisms for, they said a lot of digital assets are limited, if any.
Yeah.
And again, if there is no option, then it's just gone.
Right. Brian, let me ask you then, in that case, can you give any examples of clients that you've worked with recently that they've run into these problems because of these digital assets maybe not being included in the estate plan?
If you work with a firm like myself, the digital assets will be included in the estate plan, in the sense of, at least from we have our clients sign a blanket assignment of all personal property, which includes digital assets, into their trust. So that solves but that's only one part of the issue. Where we're seeing the problem is, again, it's not, and then obviously we have, people that aren't our clients that come to us and say, how do I get control of this? And, if there's no documents, in theory, then they still have the first problem is, who has the authority to deal with the asset? But again, even assuming the person who's in charge has the authority to deal with the asset, and again, then it just comes down to the practical, how do they, how do they gain assets? And, we've just seen clients where, again, we just talked about the problem. There is no, trying to get the bureaucracy issue they have with trying to get a hold of these institutions is very difficult, because again, these institutions are not set up to deal with when somebody passes away. Again, that's not their problem. They were not designed to be an investment vehicle in the sense of, your traditional Fidelity or, these brokerage companies or banks. It was not intended to operate that way. And so that's what we see. They tell us, I tried to call Coinbase and they said, we can't, we have no idea who should be in charge. And that's the problem. There is no plan. And that's the problem. It's not that even if you wanted to create a plan, there is no option to create a plan in terms of how does somebody gain access. So that's where the practical, and again, that has fraught with its own issue, is how you can convey that information, the username, password, security protocol, to somebody safely.
Well, Brian, I mean, as we land the plane on this episode, this is going to be the most Captain Obvious question. But for somebody that's listening to this right now, they haven't done any of this. They haven't started even thinking about this. What do you recommend they get started in terms of protecting their digital assets? I'm assuming it's write down the username and passwords.
Yeah, I mean, there's, just like logistically, and this is what I tell my, people I meet with every day. I said, the first thing you should be doing, and you can be doing this today, whether or not you move forward with me, getting an estate plan done, is you need to inventory your assets. That's the number one thing. And to some extent, the inventory doesn't have to be very sensitive. I usually recommend people use some sort of shareable document like a Google Doc or something like that, and just start putting things on there. Again, I wouldn't necessarily use that to put the usernames and passwords. But at least let them know, hey, this account exists. Okay. Cause that's the hardest part, especially with digital assets. The asset, does it even exist? You gotta communicate that. And that's a nice thing about, these digital documents, these shared documents, is create the document, share it with your backup agents, whoever's gonna be in charge after you. And you can just keep adding things. It doesn't have to be a perfect list. You start adding it, so at least they can find it, because people can't deal with what they don't know about. And this is the same for everything, whether even money. Regular banks, because people could be 1,000 different banks, especially online banks. And again, if they can't get access, that's a problem, because at least if you find the asset, there's probably a way to deal with it. Okay. Especially if it's a large asset, there's a way we'll deal with it. But, making that list is number one. And then, like I said, then you're going to have to figure out how can you, I personally use a password manager. and align password manager. And there is some risk involved with storing up all your passwords in one place, but everything's a risk at this point. And at least the password companies, they have their whole identities based on being able to protect you. And at least there is a way to potentially, in one, fail swoop, for better or worse, you can pass on your passwords and usernames to somebody in a fairly secure manner. But again, some people, obviously, some people prefer to do things offline, pencil and paper. And again, that's fine. But again, we've seen here, especially in the Southern California area, fire can destroy that. And so that's the challenge is, again, how can you make sure, somebody can gain access, but it's in a secure manner.
Yeah.
And again, there's no perfect plan, but it's, you got to have some plan.
Right. Brian, thank you for the time and insights on this topic. We truly appreciate it today.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. It was great talking today.
And thank you to everybody out there listening to this installment of Estate Planning Beyond the Binder. Look, your online life is part of your legacy. With the right planning, you can protect it, just like your home, your savings, and everything else you've built. You got to have a plan, right? And to learn more or schedule a consultation with Brian and the team, do me a favor, visit ocwillsandtrust.com today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review and comment, or share the episode with someone who needs to hear it. As always, I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.